Do you overthink every little word and action when you're in a conversation with someone? Do you have social anxiety? Does your anxiety make you dread speaking to people and make you avoid social gatherings? Well, if any of those sound like you, you're in the right place. My name's Ed Barton and I'm a social anxiety coach. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you 25 social behaviors that will make you far more attractive and allow you to actually enjoy social gatherings rather than dreading them and avoiding them. But before we dive into these points, I just want to give you a little bit of background of where these came from. These actually come from a book called How to Talk to Anybody by Leal Lowndes. And Leal herself struggled with really bad social anxiety for many, many years. And she went out of her way to face down her fears. And she went from a carer at home looking after her sick mum who was struggling with terrible social anxiety and blushing. She pushed herself outside of her comfort zone. She became a teacher. Then she worked as cabin crew on an airline. And finally, she even acted on stage. So she's someone who knows all about social anxiety and systematically and bravely facing down your fears to get rid of social anxiety disorder. So she really knows what she's talking about, and these tips are really excellent. So let's dive right into them. The first tip is to relax. And as I've said in other videos on my channel, I believe relaxation is the most important fundamental skill in overcoming social anxiety and being more comfortable in social situations. It's foundational because if you aren't relaxed in your body, you can't speak and act naturally. So the first thing we need to do is relax. We can practice this at home using progressive muscle relaxation invented by Edmund Jacobson, which I've talked about in other videos. And we can also just really practice through mindfulness. When we're in an interaction, we can notice when and where we're holding tension and just release that tension. The second tip is to smile. And this is another thing which I've been a massive fan on for a long time. It really changed my life and changed my anxiety levels. The more I smiled, the better I felt. It created a positive biofeedback loop. And in her book, Leal Lowndes talks about our smile should be a kind of flooding smile. You don't want to just walk into an interaction and just put on the full nervous smile straight away. You want to let it just gradually creep up to your face and be a gentle expression of a smile rather than a kind of plastered on smile. But to be honest, in my experience, any kind of a smile is better than just looking stern and aloof like we often do when we have anxiety and are scared in social situations. Because oftentimes, instead of looking scared, what actually happens is we just look intimidating or standoffish, or people think we're just very aloof. So smiling really gives out that non-verbal message that we're approachable and that we're open to conversation. Number 4 is also a very, very important one, and that is to be authentic. This can be problematic because I've worked with clients who say that they don't know how to be authentic. They don't know what their true personality is. They're so used to people pleasing that they just go along with other people's opinions and become yes men or yes women and just laugh along at their jokes, even if it's not something that they agree with, or they go along with the other person's opinions, even if they're not the real opinions that they hold. So being authentic involves tuning into your own feelings and just being congruent with what you feel inside and actually expressing that outwardly. If somebody says something that you're really not comfortable with, you don't just have to put on a fake smile and laugh. You can tell them that you have a different point of view, and that's what makes conversation interesting. Different views, it opens it up. It's a much more genuine, authentic level of expression rather than just nodding and smiling and laughing along and then walking away from the interaction feeling like you lost integrity and you weren't congruent with your true self. So be authentic. This is really important. And for a lot of people who've had social anxiety, this is very difficult because they are so used to people pleasing. So pay special attention to this one. Number 5 is gradual disclosure. Any good conversation should generally move from the superficial to the deeper level. And of course, you don't just jump right in with someone you've met talking about your deepest fears and dreams and aspirations. But by picking up on cues that the other person gives you, you can ask questions that will lead the conversation into more profound territory and allow you to have a deeper, more meaningful connection and conversation. It also involves being vulnerable and giving bits of yourself away gradually through the conversation so that you're allowed to take off your armor and actually show each other more of your true self and connect on that level. The following 2 points are related to this, and by disclosing something of yourself gradually, that's going to require a level of vulnerability, and this cannot be easy for everybody. A lot of people are quite practiced at the very superficial level of conversation where you say, "How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm great. How are you?" "I'm wonderful." Right, well that's fantastic, right? No one actually shows any of their true weakness, any of their pain points. We can't then get any deeper than that, the conversation can't progress into more interesting territory. So real deep communication and authentic, interesting conversation does require a level of vulnerability. Of course, this doesn't mean just baring your soul to strangers as soon as you meet them at a cocktail party, but it takes a calibration. You can practice how much you're comfortable with to reveal of yourself over time in a conversation. This is also related to active listening. If you're in a conversation which is going beyond the superficial level, someone is disclosing stuff to you, that requires you to be an active listener and also to pick up on the cues that is going to take the conversation into more interesting areas. You need to be actively listening so that you can pick up on the emotional resonance of what they're saying or some of the subtexts or the implied meaning. Rather than missing out on that, which will keep things at a superficial level, you need to be open and receptive to pick up their cues of what they're really trying to tell you on a deeper emotional level. And then that will allow you to have these more authentic conversations. Number 8 is physical contact. And for people like yourself watching this video and myself in the past, this was very difficult because I was very inhibited, very stiff, very uncomfortable in social situations. And I always appreciated it if someone put their hand on my shoulder and invited me into the conversation. I felt warm and I felt included. But at that point, I wasn't able to do that for other people. But as you improve your skills, you can start working on just giving someone a pat on the back when you meet them or when you shake their hand, just adding a little bit of physical contact because it gives that release of oxytocin, the bonding chemical between humans, and it creates that warmth and rapport, and everybody appreciates that. So although it may be difficult to begin with, you can start escalating gradually from just a little bit of contact to, in the end, hugging people and this kind of thing. As you get more and more comfortable socially, these kind of options do open up to you. If you're very uncomfortable socially, I know that might sound terrible to you right now. I was also never able to do hugs. I used to see people in high school and they would hug each other. I was never able to do that. But as I've grown socially and become more and more comfortable in these situations, I love to hug people now in the right situation. And it just creates that different level of warmth and connection. Number 9 is a super tricky area for anyone who's socially awkward. Receiving compliments especially can make us very uncomfortable. So it's really important to learn how to receive them. If somebody compliments you, try not to get uncomfortable and red or awkward about it and just receive it graciously, but not just say, oh, thank you, because that really shuts the whole interaction down. You can say something a bit more expansive, such as, that's really kind of you to say that, or I really appreciate that. Try and put some warmth and sincerity into it so that they feel seen for giving you that compliment, because they don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. And you can turn it back to them in this warm way, which makes them feel good for giving the compliment. The compliment falls flat if we're obviously uncomfortable and we just say, thank you. Or it's even worse if you do what I did in the past, which is make some self-deprecating comment to actually negate the compliment. You don't want to do that. You don't want to negate it at all by saying, oh, no, it was nothing special. I didn't do anything great. Or, oh, this old thing, I look terrible. That's really unsocially gracious because the other person wants you to feel good and you can make them feel good by saying, oh, that's so kind of you to notice this shirt. Yeah, it was a gift from my cousin. I really like it. Number 10 is don't apologize. Unless you've done something that's drastically wrong and does require an apology, try not to be apologetic in your language. If you struggle socially, find yourself being socially awkward, or are more on the introverted end of the spectrum, it's quite common that you would use apologetic language. And there's really no need for this because it makes you look low status in the other person's eyes. And it's a terrible habit that I had in the past where I would always be bowing and scraping and apologizing for this and that. I would put my drink down somewhere at a party and going, oh, sorry, am I in your way? Oh, sorry, yeah, I'll just move. And it just makes you very low status and gives off a real low self-esteem vibe. So try and catch yourself because it will be an ingrained habit oftentimes. And just try not to be apologetic for yourself. You have the right to take up space. You have the right to be where you are. Don't apologize. Don't apologize for yourself and for your existence, which is what I used to do and which is what I've seen with a lot of clients as well. Number 11 is somewhat related, and that is to use assertive language. Try not to use low status language. Lots of ums and ahs and nervous filler words. Try to modify that and use silence if you have to, rather than actually fill a gap with an or an ah. Just say nothing. You can also be more decisive and assertive in what you're saying. Rather than asking somebody, how about maybe would you like to go for a coffee perhaps tomorrow if it doesn't rain? You can just say, let's go for a coffee. That's much more direct. People like to be led. That's much more direct, much more decisive and assertive. And people already have enough decisions to make in their life. They don't want to be given more and more decisions to make. So you just tell them, yep, let's go for a coffee. We'll meet at 10. Let's do it. Number 12 is one of the quickest ways to get out of your own head and get out of social anxiety and put your awareness onto the other person. By showing genuine interest in them, you can start to forget about yourself, especially if you're feeling uncomfortable or you have symptoms of anxiety coming on. You can throw yourself into what they're saying. Try and find a genuine hook point that you can get really interested in. Maybe they have a similar interest to you or have traveled to some of the same places as you, or they have family members in your hometown. Try to probe and look for stuff that you can genuinely be interested in, because in my own experience when I was really struggling, this helped me so much to actually get into what they were saying, and it turned the interaction from a dreaded chore into something which I actually enjoyed because I had a genuine investment in it. Number 13 is to limit fidgeting. And when you have anxiety in social situations, it's very easy for your heart to be racing and you're moving from foot to foot, your hand is coming up to your face. And this is really something you want to avoid. Psychological research shows that people who touch their face during conversation are perceived to be less trustworthy and lower status. So try to keep your hands away from your face. This is something I went through myself. You have to use mindful attention to actually plant your base strongly, have your feet shoulder width apart, just stand with your hands by your side in front of you in a neutral position, and just resist the temptation for them to come up and touch your face or to move your hands around too much. So this often takes a bit of conscious effort to begin with to break that habit, but it will become normal for you after time. Number 14 is an issue which a lot of people struggle with in conversation, and that is eye contact. I have had so many queries from people about my video on eye contact, and I've coached people specifically on problems they have with eye contact. Now, the problem with eye contact is that if you start to make it a big deal and you start to think, how should I look at this person? It starts to become a kind of a game that you get sucked into and you forget how to make normal eye contact. The best eye contact is the eye contact that you don't think about. You're just in the conversation because you're showing genuine interest and you're absorbed in what they're saying. You're listening actively. You don't know what your eye contact's doing. You're just looking at them. They're looking at you. When they look away, you will look away and then you come back. You don't need to intensively stare right into their face. You don't need to avoid their gaze. You just want it to be an unconscious part of the conversation. So focus on other things such as the content of what they're saying, being interested in them as a person, and just forget about your eye contact. But as a rule of thumb, when they're speaking and they're making eye contact with you, you engage with eye contact. If they look away, that's the time to break eye contact, and then you look back at each other. This is also related to the following point of mirroring. You can mirror their eye contact, looking away when they look away. And what you will find is that if you have very good rapport with a person, you will naturally fall into a mirroring pattern. If they lean forward to talk to you with their hand on their chin, you may also come in and talk like this. If they lean back and cross their legs and cross their arms, you might find that subconsciously you also do the same thing. So mirroring shows that people are really in step with each other, have good rapport and are locked into a conversation. So you can actually build rapport by doing this consciously, and you don't want to overplay it so it looks like you're mimicking the other person. It could just be something subtle. If they start to open their body language and turn away a little bit, you might also turn away a little bit. You don't have to mimic their exact postures or gestures, but it shows that you're in step with them and you're on the same page and that there is that tight rapport. Number 16 is a technique called dangling conversational threads. So instead of giving closed one-word answers, you dangle some threads for different people to grab hold of. It's like dangling different kinds of bait for different people to grab onto. So if somebody asked me, where am I from? And I just said, Bristol. That doesn't give them anything to go off. So usually how I introduce myself is I say, I'm from a small city in the southwest of England. It's out in the countryside. It's famous for rugby and cider. It's about 90 minutes to the northwest of London. And then many different things can open up from there, such as people saying, oh, I love the British countryside, it's beautiful. Or I've never had cider. You guys drink that, don't you, in the west of England? We just drink lager where I'm from. I've never really played rugby. We're more like soccer fans where I'm from. There's many different conversational threads that can open up by you giving a bit more information to a generic one-word answer. Number 17 is somewhat related to mirroring, and this is called mood matching. If you open a conversation with someone and maybe they're going through a hard time, you don't want to come in at a super high energetic register. You want to be able to moderate your mood to be able to meet them where they're at. Alternatively, if they are in a super high mood, you also want to be able to raise your energetic register and meet them up there. So try to match their mood so that you guys are both on the same wavelength, and it's not like, hey, how are you doing today? Oh, my dog just died, or vice versa. So try and pay attention to this, use a bit of emotional intelligence and feel into their mood and try to match them on that frequency. Number 18 is a very key skill, and that is to try to focus on the other person. A lot of times what we do in social interactions is try to sell ourselves and reel off a list of our achievements and give them our personal CV and try to show people how good we are. But what people really appreciate is being able to talk about themselves. People's favorite topic is generally talking about themselves. So if you give them a space to do that, people will generally very much appreciate it and enjoy the interaction. Throughout history, some of the most successful people socially are those that make the other person feel like the smartest person in the room. Rather than reeling off their own accolades and talking about themselves, they throw their attention into the other person and really make them feel special, make them feel seen and heard and smart and valued as well. So really try and put your spotlight on the other person, put the focus and the attention on them. In relation to this, the most important word for anybody is their own name. And it has a special kind of resonance with us. If we hear our name mentioned, our ears prick up and we can hear it from across a crowded room. So try to use the power of the name. When you're talking to people, don't overdo this, but you can just drop in, oh, Stephen, yeah, that's a brilliant thing that you said. I really appreciate that point. And it just creates more intimacy, and people, it's a subconscious reaction. They can't even help it. You just naturally get that feeling of intimacy when people use your name. But as I said, there is a minimum effective dose. You don't want to overdo this, otherwise it can feel contrived and almost a little bit intrusive if people use your name too much. But just dropping it in here and there in an interaction really creates that warmth between you and the person you're speaking to. Number 20 is don't fawn. And this means don't gush out with emotion if you find that somebody has a common interest with you or they have a skill that you admire. If you suddenly start gushing and saying, oh, that's amazing, that's so brilliant, I think that's fantastic, could you teach me how to do that? It suddenly puts you in a subordinate position and it lowers your status in the other person's eyes. And depending on the kind of person they are, they may exploit that. So instead of just jumping in with a comment like, oh, me too, yeah, I love that, try to withhold it a little bit. It makes you more emotionally continent. It makes you seem as if you're able to hold your own space. You don't just jump into them and start giving your power away to them. And you come across a bit more cool, calm, and collected. So try to resist the temptation of gushing or fawning over people that you admire. And this is difficult if you have social anxiety or you have low self-esteem, because you will view yourself as being lower in the dominance hierarchy. But by giving away your power like this, it just puts you in a position of being low status in other people's eyes. So try to catch yourself before you do this and just hold yourself back a little bit so you come across as more reserved and having more self-esteem. Number 21 is using empathizers. And this is related to the skill of active listening. Instead of just jumping into the conversation with, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean, that happened to me the other day. You can just offer little things that show the other person that you're with them, you're walking through the experience with them. You can say things like, that must have been really tough. I can imagine how hard that must have been. Or that must have been a fantastic experience. You don't just dive right in and start taking over the conversation with the story of your own experience. You just throw something in there to let them know that you're with them and you can feel what they're feeling. And that will encourage people to just open up more and to deepen the conversation and the interaction. Number 23 is related to the idea of putting the spotlight on the other person and making them feel like the most important person in the room. This is called communication. And it means trying to make the other person the center of whatever you're saying where you can, where appropriate. And an example of this is I had a friend who was a fantastic communicator, and I used to get a great feeling from him because he would bring something up and then he would say, I think you would love it there. You should go to Langkawi. You're going to love it in Langkawi. And there's so much to it. It makes you feel like, wow, this person knows enough about me. He's been listening to what I've been saying enough to build up a picture of who I am and what my interests are and what I would like. And it really resonated with me, and it really resonates with other people. So that's just one example of how you can put the emphasis on the other person and make it about them, bring the you into it. Number 24 is a very interesting technique that's also known as the Benjamin Franklin effect. And what Franklin found out was that people are more likely to be positive towards him after he had asked them for a favor. And it doesn't have to be something huge like, can I borrow your car for the weekend? It could literally just be like, could you please pass me a napkin, or would you mind passing my drink over? It creates a cognitive dissonance in the person's mind whereby, because they've done something kind for you, it tells their brain that this person must be an ally or a friend because we've already done something good for them. So you can just ask people for very small favors. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Like I say, it could just be passing something at a party or borrowing their pen or something like that. And it creates this link in the mind that puts the action first. This person feels like, well, because I've already done this action for them, the emotion must follow. I must like this person because I already did that for them. The final point is to end interactions on a positive note. When I struggled with social anxiety and I was very socially awkward, I would be in a conversation and I just did not know how to end it. I felt so nervous, and sometimes the clock would be ticking and I had another appointment to get to. And I remember one instance where I was talking to the owner of a bookshop, and we had started off saying how much I loved his bookshop, and he started to tell me all about his business and everything, but he started to go on and on and on. And I had a very important meeting to get to. And because I started to panic, I just ended the interaction very abruptly and just said, I'm really sorry, I've got to go now, bye, and just left. And whenever I went into the bookshop after that, the guy seemed a bit hurt by the way I'd abruptly ended our last interaction. So try to wrap things up on a positive note. You can say something that shows gratitude, such as, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you, or I'm aware of time, I don't want to hold you any longer, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time and sharing these points with me. And just wrap things up in a very positive way like that. As I say, often adding in a compliment by saying it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, or showing some gratitude, such as thank you so much for giving your time to me this afternoon, and then just exit from there. So with this point in mind, I want to wrap things up on a positive note. It's been brilliant speaking with you. There's other content on my channel which I'm sure you're going to enjoy, which you can find here, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.